Cynthia and I met through another one of our advisors, John Higginson, actually, as I was seeking feedback on my plans to help small businesses work better with larger ones. Those large companies have pretty significant vendor security requirements for small vendors oftentimes, and I was asking Cynthia a lot about that. What I found was very quickly was that Cynthia is passionate about many topics inside the space, and has just been an incredible wealth of perspective while she's simultaneously gone to bat for us to open up new opportunities and match us up with the right people to kind of move the business forward. So I'm so happy to welcome her to our advisory board and to talk to her today. Cynthia, welcome.
Thanks, Brian.
Would love it if you could just tell our listeners a little bit about your past experience. What drove you through your professional journey?
Well, I actually could start with my very first job, which was a small business owned by friends of my family. They had a Harley Davidson dealership, which was just a small couple of stores. But I definitely got a feel for what it was like to have to be every day running a small business and not necessarily having all the resources, but doing the best you can with what you had. And so as I moved through my career in college, I actually studied journalism and I ended up working for a small business newspaper and covering business. So I worked for Business First, which is kind of like a Crane's competitor. And I wrote a lot of stories about small businesses. So I've always had a really strong curiosity and passion for how entrepreneurs get started, how they keep their business going, and then always an affection for them in the sense that I've worked for some and I have friends of my family that have owned multiple ones throughout my childhood. And so as I moved through my career, I didn't end up staying in journalism. It was actually at a time when a lot of newspapers were closing and things just weren't working well from a career perspective. So I ended up going back and getting an MBA and then having more understanding of how business in general works. And then ultimately, I was in a marketing role and I was kind of pulled into security conversations right when the internet started to be more of a thing for businesses in general. And that, of course, also meant it was a new vector for fraud and for security issues. And so at the time, I was the person who really understood a lot about how we were marketing to those consumers. But I also was the one who probably had the best idea of when a phishing email wasn't really coming from us, but looked a lot like it might be. So I was working for some really large banking institutions. I've worked for several for about 20 years. And in that moment, just trying to get an understanding of what to do with the phishing and how to help consumers kind of navigate through things that were digital while at the same time building the digital brand. And with all of that going on, I ended up being really drawn to the security space and a great passion for helping that kind of with consumers, helping the business figure out a way to navigate through that. And so the security team ended up making a role for me to come over and offered to sort of train me. And that's where I got my start in security. And I've been in the security space for about 15 years. So first at some very large banks, which were highly regulated, and it's obviously really critical information. And now more recently at a more medium-sized firm. And that's where I am today as kind of the person who helps with security the most and figures out how to navigate through. The company that I work for today actually targets a lot of small businesses with our products. So we're a lender and we lend to small businesses. And again, it's that same passion and wanting to be helpful. But we also have many vendors who are small businesses that help us. So as a medium-sized company, you end up helping smaller businesses as you try to grow your business. So the combination has put me squarely back in that space. It's interesting. I probably in a very unique security perspective because I always think about how would I want this to come off from a branding perspective, in addition to just making sure it's secure. And I agree with you. It's building that trust with your customers, whether they're consumers or small business. And so making sure that you're considering what is it that they value in your brand and what do they value in your company? And how can I just make sure security is not an add-on, but really blend it in? And that's been one of my focuses. I kind of, when I moved over from the marketing department to security, my surprise was that there wasn't a lot of data, like in the way that marketing groups always have. There wasn't a lot of understanding of who's the end user of what we're trying to build, whether it's an internal process of the end user or even something you want externally. And that was something that I really worked hard to try to change. So I definitely come at security from a very different perspective. So I actually started when I moved over from marketing to security. I was paired up with some folks that had been in law enforcement for a really long time. In my original role, I was more of a fraud investigator, but
Hmm.
that's how I also got to truly understand the impact of when small businesses. So I guess one story I can tell is we were investigating a situation when I worked for the bank, and it was with a lot of card data getting stolen. And we were trying to understand what was the source of the data, and there was this chain of small pharmacies that were independently owned. And we were really struggling to figure out, well, how were they all kind of hacked at the same time and what was going on? And finally, one of the investigators from the law enforcement side said, well, find out who is, if their point of sale system goes down, who do they call? And so we finally asked them, when you're coming in on a Monday morning and suddenly you can't, nothing's working, what's the 1-800 number you're calling? And it turned out it was all of the same help company. So they were all had the same tech company. And so we knew, oh, well, that's, and it turned out after digging around more and we actually ended up getting the FBI involved, that was the company that we ended up figuring out was the breach point. But small businesses had no way to leverage that. And even I, working for a huge, bank at the time, didn't have a way to leverage that. So kind of also being able to know more about how law enforcement works, being able to package up sort of what you want them to look at. And that's what actually motivated me to go back. And now I did get a master's in digital forensics because I wanted to be able to have the data and the information that I would need to share with the folks that I knew could take it further. And so I have that background training as well. And what I really push my team a lot on is understanding the threat landscape today, because it can be really helpful to know a lot of things in theory, but it really boils down to what's going on today. How is data really getting stolen? Just thinking logically through what would be the next point. Almost this is where the journalism training kind of comes in a little bit too. So we
Yeah.
just kind of eliminate, the kind of the saying that I always heard when I was working with the law enforcement folks, when I was earlier in my security career was, well, once you've eliminated what's possible, then you're just left with, well, this has got to be the answer. And so I really am very methodical. I have more of a journalism approach in that perspective when we try to really understand things. But I think looking at threat vectors that way has really been a good way for us to get a grip on like how we want to put something in front of control wise, or how we want to think about what's the most important thing. You have to prioritize and you can't do it all. And the priorities will change. But I think just getting a good understanding always of, well, what are we trying to deal with from a threat perspective is how I tend to look at it. I think when I first started off, it was very much looked at like the security role was just, they were the folks that focused on security. So if there was a problem, just, throw that over the fence. The security folks will take care of it. And I think we've evolved to understand that really it has to be almost in every role in the company. So I realized that it's also an education possibility because most folks aren't doing security every day. They don't have the background that the security team would have as far as what happened with the last 12 incidents that we managed. They weren't always involved in those. And so I think that it almost takes on a true evangelism kind of role almost,
Right.
because you're trying to get in front of them for changing behaviors and for prioritizing something that may not necessarily show up as an obvious way to get their bonus higher or to get the company to grow, but everyone recognizes is really foundational. So I've become a little bit of a security champion, and I spend a lot of time currently just kind of evangelizing how security can help you, why we need to care, but also digging a lot into the processes that are going on so that I can find very practical ways to create controls that are going to work. I think a lot of times the other issue is businesses will just go around, if they don't really like what you're doing, they'll find ways to sort of skirt the system or find some shortcuts they can take. And that's not always what you want, because you really want them to be able to follow the path and make sure that security is a priority, but it can't be an inhibitor. And that's a really fine balance. And I think that changes a lot too. I actually think if you streamline it, that helps so much, because knowing that it's a risk that you can at least feel confident in going into just focusing on growing your business. and not feeling like you have to be very concerned about the security risk because you've got that covered, that is a really big relief. And I think that is my role as a security professional, is let me take care of that part and give that confidence level to our business leaders and make sure they've got the right information. And that's how we want to make sure that they can just focus on what they need to do. But like, think about like my vet, my vet is just super sweet. I have older dogs, and they have gone way out of their way to kind of accommodate what I need and to really help. But I know that if they weren't around, that would be very difficult for me. I'd have a hard time finding another one that I've built that relationship with. And they do have a lot of data, and
Yeah.
so that's definitely one. I can I name two, because I
Yeah.
also feel like I
Do
am also an executive director of a nonprofit, and it's just a church I've gone to for 20 years. And it's another one that I feel like it's a community partner. It's definitely one that I feel very strongly needs to continue to be supportive. But, one of the things I actually do too, is just a volunteer, is really try hard to make sure we're protecting data. Because
Mhm.
as folks give donations or want to support an organization like that, they do not have the ability to have somebody with security on full time. So it's just been something where I've recognized, and I think a lot of small business owners realize, it's critical, but it can't be the expertise always in house, and it can't always be something that you're focused on. So, for me, I have a big passion about helping small businesses protect what matters so that they can continue to do what their mission is. Well, I really was excited about just I think what you're building and how your mission is to help, with the small business. This actually solves a problem for me too, which is always nice. And so I think when there's mutual problem solving, that's always a great partnership. So when I originally saw the product in its very early form, I sort of could see the kernel of where this could grow. And I was really excited to be able to provide recommendations and suggestions for like how it could be better and what could make it more useful. And then I sort of saw how you were going in and making those changes. So I'm still excited to see it. And even the times that I've checked in and out, it's been a few months sometimes between our conversations, but the product has just expanded so much. So I'm excited to see how we can even try to use it more, integrate it in more with even what my company's doing, and then be able to share it, because there isn't anything out there that I've seen that's solving this problem in a very streamlined way. And I think going back to where I was talking about small businesses, having worked at one, having reported and covered them a lot in journalism, and then having helped a lot through the very disruptive issues that happen when your system gets taken over in some very unexpected way, automating some of these controls and having the confidence that in the automation you haven't lost anything important is a really strong confidence builder. And that's
Yeah.
what I feel like this product can do, more so than a lot of other things I've seen.
It's great to receive that feedback and say that this is actionable right away. Let's figure out in our roadmap and our next sort of iteration what we're going to do, and we're really serious about taking that type of feedback. So that's a huge part of why we established the board, is to make sure that this product is solving today's problems. And you and I both know that the big differentiator there is actually helping people do the homework behind
Yeah.
security, the security program types of requirements. And that's a pretty hard thing to do, right? It can be complex sometimes, and you have to synthesize a lot into something that kind of feels like TurboTax, right? That's what we like to say. Is
Yeah,
that is
and I would agree with that analogy, because I feel like the requirements today and even what folks may want to know to keep secure in their system is along the lines of the tax laws in terms of complications and nuances and
yeah,
if then situations. So I feel like your product just helps so much. The Havoc Shield product just allows you to bypass all that. I don't have to be the smartest person on the planet to know how to do it. I can just answer some quick, simple questions. And that's what that's just been for me. What's been fun is to help build something that I know can be very practically used.
can you leave us all with a word of advice, or maybe a tip that could help our small business listeners, or even those folks in some of the large organizations, better secure their personal digital safety, or their organization?
Yeah, I think the advice actually is more just know your processes. So I feel like for us, you can bring in the most intelligent security expert in the world. But if you don't really understand where your data is going and where it's stored, then it's not going to be possible to build any kind of controls. And very often, I know that there are times when there's a security incident that happens, but it's often because somebody forgot about a file that was out there, or a server that they thought was offline, or an access that they thought had been terminated. So it's really just some really foundational 101 things that I think can be the most effective sometimes and aren't truly security focused, just more kind of that cleanup idea.
Right. Yeah, that process and that change management piece, making sure you know where stuff is,
Yeah.
is the core of it. If you don't know where things are and what kind of data you hold, then as you said, it's really hard to protect those types of things. That's a great tip, and it goes for large and small, and even personal, right? You got to know
Okay, yes,
where
and
how
personal as
much,
well. Yes.
yeah, how much do you have in Google Drive, and how much is sitting on that old hard drive in the back corner, and so that's a great tip. Well, Cynthia, thank you so much. One for being part of our advisory board. Your experience and help has been truly, truly critical already. And believe me, we're gonna use even more of it in the future. And thank you for spending the time talking about your past experience and what you're looking forward to.
Great. No, thanks for having me.